When we talk about never getting angry or bothered by anyone, the first and most crucial step is understanding one fundamental truth. You cannot control anyone but yourself. It sounds simple, almost self-evident, but the majority of our daily emotional turmoil comes from failing to grasp this. We instinctively believe that other people's actions, their words, their opinions, somehow hold the power to dictate our emotional state. We think that if someone insults us, belittles us, or frustrates us, it must provoke anger, irritation, or hurt. But this is an illusion, and a very costly one. True emotional mastery begins when we recognize that all external events are neutral until we assign them meaning. And that meaning is entirely ours to give. Think about it for a moment. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Immediately, you might feel a surge of anger. How dare they, you think. But consider, what did the other person do objectively? They moved their car from one lane to another. That's all the story you tell yourself. That they are reckless, disrespectful, or malicious is your own mind interpreting reality. The same is true in your personal and professional life. When someone says something rude or dismissive, it only matters if you accept their words as a reflection of your value or your worth. But if you refuse to grant them that power, their ability to bother you evaporates. This is not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be indifferent. It is about cultivating clarity. It is about drawing a line between stimulus and reaction, where you reclaim the authority over your own mind. There is a profound freedom in this realization. Once you understand that your anger is never a response to someone else's behavior, but rather to your interpretation of it, you can begin to choose how to respond, or not respond, deliberately. This is the difference between being reactive and being responsible. Responsibility, in this sense, is not a burden, it is liberation. The psychological implications are deep. Most of the anger we experience is born from a subtle surrender. We unconsciously hand over control of our inner world to external circumstances. And yet when we take it back, when we reclaim the awareness that we are the sole gatekeepers of our peace, something remarkable happens. The triggers that once seemed unbearable become minor disturbances, flickers on the periphery rather than storms at the center. People's negativity may still exist, but it no longer penetrates the core of our calm. The world doesn't have to change for you to remain unshaken. Only your perception and response need to evolve. Philosophically, this aligns with centuries of wisdom. The Stoics taught that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Buddhism echoes the same principle. Attachment and craving are the roots of suffering, not the external world. Modern psychology reinforces it, showing that our perception shapes our emotional reality. When we internalize that control over our mind is our most potent tool, we stop being victims of circumstance and begin to live with intentionality. The person who insults you is not the one who diminishes you. The diminishment happens only if you accept it. By refusing to accept it, you assert the sovereignty of your own consciousness. So, if there is a single truth to anchor in your journey toward being unbothered, it is this: your inner state is your responsibility, and no one else has the right to dictate it. External events are neutral. Their power over you exists only to the extent that you allow it. By recognizing this, you lay the foundation for all the other practices we will explore: observing triggers, cultivating compassion, strengthening boundaries, and ultimately embracing life's imperfection without agitation. Master this first principle, and the rest becomes far easier. Remember, the moment you realize that no one can make you angry without your consent, you hold a profound form of freedom, an unshakable, quiet power that cannot be taken, bought, or stolen. That is where true calm begins. Once we accept that we are the sole custodians of our emotional state, the next step is to observe our triggers without judgment. This is where most people falter. It is not enough to intellectually understand that no one makes us angry. We must also confront the patterns within ourselves that consistently spark irritation, frustration, or defensiveness. Triggers are like mirrors, reflecting parts of ourselves we often deny or avoid. They are not failures or flaws, they are opportunities for awareness. By paying attention to what bothers us and why, we begin to dismantle the unconscious scripts that give others' behavior undue power over our emotions. Consider how subtle triggers often are. A colleague's casual criticism might feel like a personal attack. A family member's teasing might provoke inexplicable resentment. Even small, everyday slights, the tone of someone's voice, a delayed text, a minor interruption, can elicit disproportionate reactions. The common mistake is to react automatically, to allow these triggers to ignite the old, conditioned patterns of anger or defensiveness. But if we pause even for a brief moment and observe the emotion as it arises, we create the space for conscious choice. That space is where transformation happens. It is the threshold between being a passive reactor and an active participant in our own psychological life. Observation does not mean detachment or cold rationality. It means cultivating a gentle curiosity about your inner world. When a trigger arises, ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling? Where in my body is this sensation registering? What past experiences, unresolved conflicts, or deeply held beliefs might be amplifying this reaction? By breaking the experience into observable components, you begin to see that your emotional response is not dictated by the external event itself, but by the lens through which you interpret it. This is a profound realization. The story you tell yourself about what is happening is what fuels your agitation, not the event in isolation. Psychologically, this practice rewires the brain. Neuroscience tells us that repeated emotional reactions strengthen neural pathways, making automatic responses more likely. By consciously observing triggers without immediate reaction, we create new pathways of awareness, choice, and calm. Over time, situations that once provoked anger lose their intensity, not because the circumstances have changed, but because the internal narrative has shifted. You learn to respond from clarity rather than impulse, from presence rather than fear or defensiveness. In essence, you cultivate a mind that is resilient, fluid, and unshakable. Philosophically, observing triggers aligns with the wisdom of mindful traditions. Buddhism teaches that awareness of arising sensations and emotions is the first step toward liberation. The Stoics remind us that life presents constant stimuli, but only our judgment of them has the power to disturb us. Modern psychology echoes the same principle. Self-reflection and metacognition, the ability to observe one's own thoughts and feelings, are key predictors of emotional regulation and mental resilience. By consciously witnessing our triggers, we step out of the unconscious cycle of reaction and into deliberate agency. Ultimately, observing your triggers without judgment is not merely a technique, it is a profound act of self-respect. It is a commitment to seeing yourself clearly, to understanding your inner landscape with honesty and compassion. Each trigger becomes a teacher, each irritation an invitation to deepen your self-awareness. In this way, you transform moments that once caused frustration into opportunities for growth and empowerment. So, when you next feel that familiar surge of anger, pause and observe. Notice the sensations, name the emotions, explore their origins, and recognize that the power to respond differently lies entirely within you. This is how you reclaim your autonomy, how you begin to live in a state where external events no longer dictate your inner peace. Awareness of your triggers is the bridge between understanding your mind and mastering it, and it is here that the path to being truly unbothered begins. Once you begin observing your triggers without judgment, the next step is to reframe others' behavior through compassion and curiosity. This is where emotional mastery deepens, because it moves beyond self-awareness and into the territory of perspective. Most of the anger and irritation we experience is fueled not simply by what others do, but by the stories we tell ourselves about why they do it. We assume intent, assign malice, and craft narratives that place ourselves as victims. But what if those narratives are wrong? What if instead of seeing their actions as personal affronts, we chose to see them as expressions of their own struggles, limitations, or unmet needs? This is not naive optimism. It is psychological insight applied with intention. Consider the way most conflicts arise. A co-worker criticizes your work sharply. Your immediate response may be indignation or resentment. But pause for a moment. Why are they behaving this way? Perhaps they are under extreme stress, anxious about their own performance, or trying to assert control because they feel insecure. The content of their criticism is less important than understanding that their behavior is a reflection of their inner state, not a verdict on your worth. When we view others through this lens, the emotional sting diminishes. Compassion does not excuse bad behavior, nor does it require that you accept abuse. It simply frees you from carrying the weight of their unresolved struggles as if it were yours. Curiosity works in tandem with compassion. When someone provokes you, rather than reacting reflexively, ask what might be driving this. What fears, assumptions, or unmet needs could be fueling this action? By approaching situations with a sense of inquiry rather than judgment, you replace automatic reactivity with conscious understanding. This shift is profound because it changes the nature of interaction from a battlefield to a field of observation and learning. Each challenging encounter becomes an opportunity to see human behavior clearly, without personalizing or exaggerating its impact on you. You learn to respond with discernment rather than impulse, with clarity rather than defensiveness. Psychologically, this reframing rewires our emotional responses. When we habitually assume the worst in others, our nervous system becomes primed for constant threat detection, triggering stress, anxiety, and anger. Compassion and curiosity, however, recalibrate this system. They allow the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and reflection, to modulate the emotional responses of the limbic system. The result is a mind that can observe provocation without being hijacked by it, a mind that responds from understanding rather than reaction. In practical terms, this means that insults, criticism, or rude behavior no longer have the same disruptive effect they once did. Philosophically, this principle has long roots. The Stoics advise that one should assume that all people act according to their nature and understanding, which is often flawed or incomplete. Buddhism teaches that all beings act according to their own conditioning, shaped by past experiences, desires, and ignorance. Modern psychology echoes these insights. When we contextualize behavior in terms of underlying needs or traumas, we reduce the likelihood of interpersonal conflict and emotional contagion. The world remains imperfect, but our relationship to it becomes steadier, more resilient, and less reactive. Ultimately, reframing others' behavior through compassion and curiosity is a gift to yourself. It liberates you from the emotional chains of resentment and indignation. It is a conscious choice to see clearly, to interpret events through a lens of understanding rather than judgment. By recognizing that most provocation is not personal, you protect your inner equilibrium. You begin to inhabit a state where external negativity exists, but it no longer dictates the quality of your mind or the tone of your day. So the next time someone challenges you, insults you, or irritates you, pause and ask, what story am I telling myself, and is it true? What might be happening inside them that explains this behavior? When you answer these questions with curiosity and compassion, you reclaim control over your emotional life. You step out of the battlefield of perceived offenses and into the clarity of understanding. A clarity that transforms irritation into insight, conflict into perspective, and agitation into calm. This is how emotional freedom begins to flourish. As we begin to reframe others' behavior with compassion and curiosity, it becomes clear that there is another layer to emotional freedom, strengthening your inner boundaries and cultivating a robust sense of self-worth. Anger, resentment, and frustration often arise when we feel violated, disrespected, or diminished. These emotions are signals that our internal boundaries have been crossed or are unclear. The problem is not with the external event itself, but with the vulnerability we carry within us. When we lack firm boundaries or rely on external validation, even minor provocations can feel like existential threats. To live unbothered, we must develop an internal fortress that others' negativity cannot breach. Inner boundaries are not walls to isolate ourselves from the world. They are flexible lines of self-respect and self-awareness that define what we will accept and what we will not. A person with strong boundaries knows their worth and does not seek validation from every glance, comment, or action of others. They understand that their value is inherent, not contingent on approval or avoidance of criticism. This clarity is crucial because when our sense of self is rooted externally, every opinion, every rude remark, every slight becomes a potential source of agitation. But when self-worth is internalized, external events lose their ability to disturb our peace. The insult bounces off, the criticism is filtered, and the provoker no longer holds dominion over our mind. Developing boundaries and self-worth begins with honest reflection. You must ask yourself, what do I value, and what do I refuse to compromise? What behaviors from others will I not accept, and why? This is not about rigidity or judgment of others, but about clarity regarding your own needs, values, and limits. When you are grounded in this understanding, you no longer react reflexively to provocation. Instead, you respond with discretion, assertiveness, or, in many cases, deliberate non-reaction. There is an immense power in simply knowing where you stand and refusing to allow the chaos of others to destabilize you. Psychologically, this has profound effects. When we strengthen our internal boundaries, our nervous system no longer interprets minor interpersonal slights as life-threatening events. We shift from a state of hyper-reactivity to one of measured awareness. This reduces chronic stress, fosters resilience, and allows our emotional energy to flow toward growth, creativity, and meaningful engagement rather than being consumed by reactive cycles of anger and hurt. Over time, this internal fortitude becomes a habit, an unconscious filter that shields our peace without requiring constant effort. People may still test our patience, but our equilibrium remains intact. Philosophically, this principle reflects timeless wisdom. The Stoics emphasize that true power resides in self-mastery and not in controlling others. Buddhist thought reinforces that attachment to approval and fear of disapproval are the sources of suffering. Modern psychology supports this with research showing that individuals with strong self-concept and clear boundaries experience lower levels of stress, depression, and interpersonal conflict. By cultivating these qualities, we are not becoming cold or indifferent. We are learning to navigate the world with clarity, confidence, and calm. Ultimately, inner boundaries and self-worth are the bedrock of emotional immunity. They are the shield that allows you to engage with the world without being consumed by it. When someone attempts to provoke you, you are not passive. You are grounded. Your peace is not contingent on their behavior. Your value does not fluctuate with their opinions. You are, in essence, untouchable in the ways that matter most. So cultivate your internal boundaries with deliberate care. Anchor your sense of worth in yourself, not in the fleeting judgments of others. When you do, you step into a life where external negativity can exist, but it no longer defines your inner state. You become steady in the face of chaos, unwavering in the midst of criticism, and unshaken by attempts to diminish or provoke you. This is the power of a mind that is self-contained, a heart that is self-respecting, and a life that is truly free. As we build the foundation of inner boundaries and self-worth, the next essential step in never getting angry or bothered is the deliberate practice of mindfulness and emotional regulation. Awareness alone, while powerful, is insufficient if we do not train ourselves to navigate the turbulence of our internal states. Life will inevitably present provocations, frustrations, and disappointments. The difference between those who are unshaken and those who are consumed by anger lies in the capacity to recognize emotions as they arise, and to respond rather than react. Mindfulness is the practice of observing your mind without judgment, and emotional regulation is the art of channeling those observations into conscious choice. When an emotion arises, it does so in the body before it manifests fully in thought or behavior. You might feel tension in your chest, a clenching in your jaw, or a surge of heat in your face. Most people ignore these signals, allowing them to escalate into full-blown anger or agitation. Mindfulness teaches us to notice these early signals, to name the sensation without attaching a story or assigning blame. I notice tension, we say to ourselves, or I feel irritation rising. In doing so, we create a space, a pause, between stimulus and reaction. This space is where freedom resides. It is the gap in which choice can enter, where you can decide whether to respond with clarity or to be swept into a habitual, destructive reaction. The practice of emotional regulation does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending they do not exist. On the contrary, it is about embracing emotions fully, allowing them to flow through you without dictating your actions. By acknowledging anger, frustration, or hurt as natural human experiences, you reduce their intensity. They are no longer enemies to fight, but signals to understand. Breathing techniques, journaling, meditation, and even mindful movements such as walking or yoga can reinforce this capacity. Each practice strengthens the ability to witness emotion as it arises, giving it shape and presence without letting it hijack your mind. Over time, this transforms your relationship with your internal life. Emotions become teachers, not tyrants. Neuroscience supports this approach. The brain's limbic system reacts rapidly to perceived threats, triggering the fight or flight response. Left unchecked, these reactions can dominate behavior. Mindfulness engages the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for reasoning, reflection, and deliberate decision-making, allowing us to moderate the automatic impulses of the limbic system. This neurological interplay explains why consistent practice of mindfulness and emotional regulation cultivates resilience. You develop a mind that is flexible yet anchored, responsive yet unshakable, capable of navigating life's challenges with calm discernment. Philosophically, mindfulness aligns with a tradition of wisdom across cultures. Buddhist thought emphasizes presence as the path to liberation, showing that suffering arises not from events themselves, but from our attachment and reactivity. The Stoics teach that the only thing truly within our control is our own mind, and by cultivating awareness we exercise that control intentionally. Modern psychology reinforces this. People who consistently practice mindfulness report lower levels of stress, increased emotional stability, and improved interpersonal relationships. They are not less human, they are more fully present, more grounded, and less prone to being swept away by the storms of others' behavior. Ultimately, mindfulness and emotional regulation give you the tools to live in the world without being dominated by it. Provocation may still occur, criticism may still be leveled, and frustration may still arise, but these events no longer control your inner state. Instead, you observe, you breathe, you respond consciously, and you move forward with clarity. This is not passive acceptance, it is active mastery. It is the cultivation of a mind and heart that remain steady even when life attempts to shake them. So, practice presence with intention. Notice the rising currents of emotion. Welcome them without judgment and guide them consciously. Through this disciplined attention, you transform the landscape of your internal life. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable, what once provoked you becomes instructive, and the power to remain unbothered becomes not an aspiration but a lived reality. This is how calm becomes habitual and emotional freedom becomes yours. Even after we have cultivated self-awareness, observed our triggers, reframed others' behavior, strengthened boundaries, and practiced mindfulness, there remains one ultimate principle that allows us to live unshaken, accepting life's imperfections, and letting go of the illusion of control. This is perhaps the hardest lesson for most of us, because it requires humility, honesty, and a willingness to face uncertainty without defense. Anger and frustration often arise when reality does not conform to our expectations, when people behave unpredictably, when events unfold in ways we did not anticipate, or when life seems unfair. By clinging to control or insisting that the world obey our desires, we set ourselves up for constant agitation. The path to being unbothered lies in embracing life as it is, rather than how we wish it would be. Acceptance does not mean passivity or resignation. It is not an abdication of responsibility or a surrender to chaos. Rather, it is a conscious recognition that some things are outside our sphere of influence, and that our energy is best spent on what we can shape: our thoughts, our attitudes, and our responses. Consider the difference between being annoyed at someone for being late and calmly adjusting your expectations or plans. The lateness itself is neutral. It is our judgment and insistence that it should not happen that creates the disturbance. When we practice acceptance, we stop battling reality and start navigating it with clarity. We conserve our emotional resources for situations where they can make a real difference, instead of wasting them on resistance. Philosophically, this principle echoes the wisdom of both Stoicism and Eastern thought. The Stoics taught that we must distinguish between what is within our control and what is not, and that tranquility comes from focusing only on the former. Buddhist teachings similarly emphasize the impermanence of life and the futility of clinging to expectations, showing that suffering arises not from circumstances, but from our resistance to them. Modern psychology confirms this as well. Those who can tolerate uncertainty and relinquish excessive control experience lower levels of stress, greater resilience, and more stable emotional lives. Accepting life's imperfection is not weakness. It is a strategy for mental and emotional survival, for thriving amid chaos. Letting go of control also transforms our relationships. When we stop attempting to micromanage or manipulate others to conform to our desires, we allow interactions to unfold naturally. This reduces conflict, diminishes resentment, and fosters authentic connection. People behave according to their own conditioning, desires, and limitations. Attempting to bend them to our will is both futile and corrosive. By releasing the need to control outcomes, we create space for patience, understanding, and genuine engagement. We become observers of life rather than prisoners of it, capable of responding to challenges with creativity and composure rather than reactivity and frustration. Psychologically, the ability to let go develops emotional resilience. When events diverge from expectation, instead of spiraling into anger or disappointment, we learn to adapt, adjust, and recover more quickly. The mind becomes like water, flexible and responsive, rather than rigid and brittle. This fluidity does not imply passivity, it implies mastery over how we experience life. By surrendering the need for certainty and embracing imperfection, we release the grip of external events on our inner state. We become free from the tyranny of circumstance. Ultimately, accepting life's imperfections and relinquishing control is the culmination of all the practices we have explored. It integrates awareness, compassion, boundaries, and mindfulness into a coherent philosophy of emotional freedom. Life will remain unpredictable. People will continue to act in ways we cannot foresee. But when we let go of the need for absolute control and embrace reality as it is, we stop being disturbed by what cannot be changed. We begin to inhabit a state of calm, clarity, and resilience that no provocation can shake. So, embrace the imperfection of life and release the illusion of control. Allow events, people, and circumstances to unfold without resistance and respond with presence, awareness, and discernment. In this acceptance lies the final, unshakable power, the freedom to remain undisturbed no matter what the world throws at you. Here, in this quiet sovereignty of mind, anger loses its grip, irritation dissolves, and true peace becomes your constant companion.